evening. It's good to see you. It's good to be with you. May God bless you in your study tonight. Today the study is called The People Want a King. I absolutely loved the human condition. We demand leaders, hoping they will bring security and peace. We want our leaders to make decisions for us, to tell us what to do, so that we won't have to take responsibility for ourselves and our actions. But power tends to corrupt, and we discover that our leaders, like us, have feet of clay. I'd like to talk about that for a minute. I think it's easy for Christians to want to go to a church or have a pastor that will tell them every answer. Some people are looking for a faith, for a Christianity, or for a Bible that will tell them every answer. And of course, there are churches and pastors like that. The problem that we run into when we start to think that way is no pastor has all the answers. The Bible doesn't answer every question about life. And God himself will never fit into our box. God himself is a wonderful, amazing mystery. So as you look to your pastors for answers, I would encourage you to look to your pastors for cues, for handles, for directions, for opportunities. There are many reasons why the people wanted a king. Kings can bring good. They fight off enemies. They make us feel safe. It makes sense to us to have a king, at least it did to the people then. And then, of course, they would be like all the other nations. But there are bad things that come with having a king as well. Kings bring taxes upon the people. Kings can become arrogant. Look at what David did with Bathsheba. An interesting discussion is, what are the effects of position and power? Are your leaders strong and arrogant? You get the sense from them that they're large and in charge, that they like the limelight, that they like to be put on a pedestal? Or are they humble and careful and prayerful? I once had someone quit our church because they wanted a pastor that was more confident. I confided in them that sometimes I didn't have all the answers, and sometimes I wasn't sure what to say. And they ended up leaving our church because they wanted a pastor that was more confident. I want a pastor that's honest with me. I want a pastor that has the same kind of struggles that I do. In fact, I look for those qualities in a friend. The kind of people that I want to have relationships with are people that are real in their strengths and in their weaknesses. I love the story of Samuel, of Hannah wanting a baby and making a promise to God. I just think all children should be wanted, and I find it so sad when there are families where the children are not wanted. I love that Hannah wanted this baby, and then when she had the baby, she kept her promise and took baby Samuel to the temple to be raised by Eli the priest. Now, I don't think that she never saw him again, because in those days, people were at the temple every day. I'm sure she spent time with him. I'm sure she brought him food and clothing. Samuel, of course, becomes a great leader because he's given to God's purpose. And all of our children, in one way or another, we have to give them for God's purpose. They're not ours. We just get to raise them. They all belong to God. And regardless of what age your children are, I tell people this when we're baptizing their children, one day they will leave you. We don't see it when they're 4 and 5, but mine are now 21, 23, and 25, and those kids are on the way out the door. How do we prepare them? How do we give them to God? How do we give them the kind of upbringing to where they will have a successful and a healthy life? When the people are looking for a king, they choose Saul. And of course, he's tall and good looking, but he's a bad king. And I think an important lesson to think about there is, what is important? Outward appearance or the things of the heart? We humans get so enamored by people that are good looking and people that are stars and people that are popular. And some of those people from Hollywood are some of the worst examples of living. It's always an important reminder to think about the qualities of a person's heart, the ability that they have to love others, to care for others, to do right, the sense of honesty and fairness and general goodness. You know, I met a guy, or was talking with a guy from church that I'd met a few times last week, and I realized something about him is that there is a goodness about him. And I don't mean he's a good man, he's a good guy. I mean, when you talk to him, you get this sense that he is a good soul, that there's something very good about him. And Saul should have been a lesson to the people of Israel that outward appearances aren't what we ought to be going on, but we ought to make decisions about who we love and who we run with and who we allow to influence us based on the goodness that comes from another person's heart. David became arrogant, but he had a heart for God. And I hope that in your living with others, you understand they're going to make mistakes. They're going to do things that aren't what you would like them to do. Please forgive them every chance you get. I have seen people in this life throw each other away for next to nothing. But I've also seen people, and you have too, that have found the grace to care for one another, the grace to forgive. And my personal belief is, as long as there's grace in a heart, the marriage can be saved. The friendship can be restored. As long as a person has grace to give, it doesn't matter what the sin. The relationship can be restored. And I've seen examples of that in my life. Here's David, who's done the unthinkable, not just taking another man's wife, but in having the man killed. It's so sad. It's so tragic. But what does he do? He confesses his sin. He goes back to God. He writes in Psalm 51, "Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence. Don't take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of my salvation." If you're listening to this tonight and you're struggling with a sin, or there's something in your life that you did a month or a year or 5 years ago and it keeps coming up and burdening you, I encourage you to find a place to pray with Psalm 51. Create in me a clean heart, O God. David was broken. David was human. But David had a heart for God. And God forgave him, and God used him, and he was a great king. And God can forgive you, and God can forgive me, and we can be his people as long as our heart is pursuing him. Sin doesn't have to have the last word. Grace, God's grace, should always have the last word. So have a wonderful class. Having been there last week, it was delightful to see you and meet some of you and to see what a wonderful class that you have. I hope to come back and visit with you again in person sometime soon. But for tonight, God bless you in your studies.